Welcome all. Welcome to Facilitating Student Engagement with Assessments. We're delighted to have Melanie Kirchhoff with us this afternoon. And I don't want to deliberate long on the introduction, but Melanie comes to us with a great deal of experience. She will tell you a little bit about herself as she starts her webinar tonight. So again, welcome everyone. Glad that you could join us. And thank you, Melanie, for joining in with us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you, Pam. So I'm excited to present today's webinar called Facilitating Student Engagement with Assessments. My name is Melanie Kirchhoff. I am a social studies curriculum and instructional specialist with Austin ISD in Austin, Texas. I have been in education for 16 years, and I currently support teachers who teach 6th through 12th grade social studies. So before we get started with learning some new information, I'd like to know what comes to mind when you hear the word assessment. Would you please type responses in the chat box? Okay, I see test, quizzes, formative and summative, measuring, hold on, I missed that one. Measurement of progress toward learning. Okay, I think we're going to address all of those. And I included some in this presentation that I thought you might end up listing. So, for example, maybe standardized tests and multiple choice tests that for hours and hours. Yes, grading for hours and hours, Dr. Willis. Homework, research papers, answering questions from the textbook, maybe group presentations to the class, or if you're trying to get 100% participation, maybe checking for understanding using whiteboards. So the goals for today's webinar is to identify different types of assessments and explore how targeted assessments facilitate student engagement and learning. We will start by looking at the three major types of assessments which you did identify, formative and summative. We're going to start with diagnostic assessments. Diagnostic assessments, or pre-assessments, allow students and teachers to have a good understanding of student strengths, weaknesses, and prior knowledge and skills. We use diagnostic assessments to help us plan ways to personalize and differentiate the learning for our students. It's like creating a menu of learning options. Formative assessments check for student understanding and performance along the learning path. They allow teachers to adjust their teaching so that students will successfully master the learning target. It's like a chef test tasting her culinary creations to see if they need more of something. These can be things such as observations during in-class activities, homework exercises as review for exams and class discussions, reflection journals, questions and answer sessions, both planned and unplanned, maybe conferences between the instructor and student at various points in the semester, in-class activities where students informally present their results, and student feedback collected by periodically answering specific questions about the instruction, and maybe their self-evaluation of performance and progress. Summative assessments measure how well a student met the stated learning objective. Summative assessments allow us to consider what went right and what went wrong, but do not help students master the learning target. It's like the customers tasting the chef's work. It's too late for the chef to make any changes. Summative assessment is more product-oriented and assesses the final product, whereas formative assessment focuses on the process towards completing the product. Jay McTighe is a strong advocate of changing our assessments so that we actually measure what matters to us. The things that matter to us include knowledge, basic skills, conceptual understandings or big ideas, and what McTighe calls long-term transfer goals. In the article identified on the slide, 3 key questions on measuring learning, McTighe says, long-term transfer goals refer to students' capacity to apply what they've learned to a new situation or different context. Transfer goals are process-oriented. They specify what we want students to be able to do with their learning in the long run when confronted by new opportunities and challenges. When we look at the needs of employers, we find that they are looking for people who can lead, collaborate, problem solve, communicate, and be adaptive and flexible. In order to know if we are preparing our students for the needs of the workforce they will be entering, we need to measure those skills. Assessments that are authentic and performance-based are better able to measure these skills. The quote on the slide stood out to me because authentic and performance-based assessments are motivating to learners, which increases student engagement. So what should authentic and performance-based assessments look like? According to McTighe, students are asked to 1, apply their learning to a new situation, and 2, explain their thinking, show their reasoning, or justify their conclusion. We will look at some ways to modify our current formative and summative assessments to better align with our learning goals and allow students to demonstrate mastery. We will look at some, but not all, of the characteristics of assessments that enhance learning as identified by J. McTighe and Grant Wiggins. Excuse me. First, it's important for students to know what learning goals are being assessed and how they would be assessed before they start the learning process. For instance, if you're going to assess your students' knowledge of political characteristics of revolutions throughout history, then students need to know this and know if you plan to assess them by having them answer multiple choice questions, write an essay, research and create a presentation, or engage in a dialogue via social media. Second, assessments enhance learning when there is an audience other than the teacher. I have seen some teachers invite other adults into their classroom during a mock trial or group presentations. Ideally, students would apply their learning in a real-life context, such as writing a policy recommendation to their representative in Congress. Audiences could be their parents, the community, business or political leaders, younger students, or themselves. Third, assessments enhance learning when there is not a single correct answer. Therefore, multiple choice tests do not enhance learning. Fourth, opportunities to collaborate enhance learning when that collaboration is meaningful. There is a difference between a group project and a team project. The members of the team each have a function and know that their contribution is necessary for the success of the team. The team works together to ensure that each team member achieves success. Fifth, in my experience, the single biggest deficit of classroom assessments is when we do not provide detailed feedback along the way. I have seen an occasional teacher provide feedback after the project has been turned in, but if the student is unable to make revisions, then the feedback doesn't enhance learning. Students need to be able to fix their mistakes or improve their work before assessment is considered done. Finally, learners need to have choice in how they will demonstrate their learning, such as the completion of different products, projects, or presentation styles, as well as how they go about the task. Having choice increases student engagement in the learning and in the assessment. Student engagement in assessments. What students and teachers find engaging was a 2016 study by Sangbei and Karikoka for the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity and the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy and Education. The goal of this study was to provide guidance to educators, assessment developers, and policymakers on how to increase student engagement in performance-based assessments. The researchers defined student engagement as a combination of the following concepts: relevance, authenticity, autonomy, collaboration, higher order thinking skills, and self-assessment. As we go through each of these concepts in a little more detail, I want you to consider your most recent assessments. Which of these concepts does your assessment include? Relevance. Relevance is making a connection to students' lived experiences, interests, or prior knowledge. In the study, both teachers and students identified relevance the most often as important for engagement. An example of a relevant assessment. Perhaps you have a geography lesson that studies the impact of urbanization on the local environment by having your students consider the development of a new housing development in their neighborhood. A series from Active Classroom that uses student interest is Zombie-Based Geography, one of my favorites. Authenticity. When a task requires students to solve real-world problems, such as problem-based learning tasks, authenticity was the second most prevalent characteristic for student engagement identified by both teachers and students. There are a lot of examples available in Active Classroom that use authenticity. The Activator series for American history, government, and world history, and the Decision-Making series for ancient history, medieval history, U.S. history, and world history, as well as key decisions in U.S. history. These lessons, ask students to solve real-world problems in order to learn about different historical events. Autonomy is when open-endedness of a task or providing choice in the process or product. Autonomy was identified by most of the teachers, but only 38% of students. An example of a lesson that provides autonomy for students is the C3 Inquiry series from Active Classroom. In that one, students are allowed to choose 3 documents from a set of 10 documents in order to support their response to the inquiry question. Students and teachers viewed collaboration as engaging because it afforded opportunities to get help from peers, opportunities for sense-making, and opportunities to socialize. Many series in Active Classroom include collaboration. One of my favorite series for collaboration is History's Mysteries. Students and teachers refer to tasks that engage higher order thinking skills as challenging but doable. Many series in Active Classroom require students to use higher order thinking skills, such as Great Documents in U.S. History, which has students answer questions about certain documents, Debating the Documents, where they are asked to verify or decide which ones are the most reliable, The Historian's Apprentice, which allows them to practice historical thinking skills, History Unfolding, the way we saw it in illustration and art, has them do this with pictures and graphics. And then Hungry Planet, Material World, and What I Eat have students compare and contrast characteristics of culture around the world. The last one, self-assessment. Some students and teachers said that self-checks could help them, but some teachers felt that there was no point, since students wouldn't do the self-checks even if required to do so. I've seen that in my experience. Only 3 of the students and teachers said that self-assessment practices allow students to be reflective and monitor their understanding and learning. Some examples: incorporating self-checks or prompts to review work before turning in, and requiring students to explain or justify their answers or use reflection questions. Let's review the characteristics of assessments that enhance learning as identified by McTighe and Wiggins. The first characteristic is related to the concept of relevancy. Having an audience other than the teacher promotes the concept of authenticity. Open-ended assessments reflect both autonomy and higher order thinking skills. Collaboration is discussed by both. Providing detailed feedback and allowing students to refine or revise their assessments helps promote self-assessment characteristics. Like having open-ended assessments, providing choice is an example of autonomy that promotes student engagement. So remember the question I asked you guys to consider before going through these 6. What I'd like you to do is to write in the chat box, Which of these concepts for student engagement does your most recent assessment include? Relevancy, authenticity, autonomy, collaboration, higher order thinking skills, or self-assessment? Okay, I see higher order thinking skills. Authenticity, excellent. Self-assessment. Collaboration and higher order thinking skills. It sounds like many of your assessments already have elements that facilitate student engagement. So to follow up with that, which of these will you be sure to include in your next performance-based assessment? Perhaps something you haven't used before. Absolutely, I'll repeat the question. Which of these concepts will you be sure to include in your next performance-based assessment? It could be the same that you've already included, or it could be a different one. I see authenticity, higher order thinking. Okay. Mary Ann said that my next assessment has a bunch of these too, but I always try to put in as many of these as I can. Which of these concepts for student engagement do you feel works the best in your classrooms? Dr. Willis said relevancy is the most important based on his experience. Pam said relevancy as well. Okay, that's an interesting distinction. Ryan said that higher order thinking works best for assessing what I feel is most important, but relevancy is most important to engagement. And then Mary Ann says students seem to care about relevancy, but they also enjoy self-assessment. And on the other hand, higher order thinking also matters to us. Considering that higher order thinking skills are the historical thinking skills, the economist thinking skills, or economic reasoning, civic engagement, all of these things really are kind of the meat of our social studies courses. So I can definitely see why higher order thinking skills and relevancy are the two listed the most. I wanted to go back to a comment that Ryan made about collaboration. He said that collaboration is tricky if you're looking for individual accountability. I wonder if we can look at collaboration as a means of allowing students to make meaning with each other prior to showing the teacher what they know, that maybe you can have both your individual accountability after they've had those opportunities for collaboration. And again, there is exactly, and I agree. I have often seen group assessments or group activities where I've seen students roll their eyes at each other when they have to collaborate. And as that student who would do the whole project because I didn't trust my other group members to do exactly what they were supposed to do, I can understand where a lot of our students come from. So one of the things that we have to consider with collaboration is that we need to perhaps redefine what that means to our students and to us, so that when we ask our students to collaborate, it's more of a means to producing a product as opposed to having a group of students work together to create a single product. Recall that I talked about the difference between a group project and a team project. On the, let's say, a football team, every player has a particular part that they play on the team. And without each of those players, they cannot actively make a touchdown or a field goal, and they can't stop the other team from making a touchdown or a field goal. So what we need to do is figure out how to have group assignments where each person in the group has a particular role that they play that is absolutely essential. And if we've done our diagnostic assessments or pre-assessments, we can assign those group roles in advance so that we support our English language learners with roles that do not require a level of English outside their capacity or beyond their zone of proximal development. We can help support our students with special needs so that we are meeting their individual education plans. We can give roles to our students who like to be the leader. They can, by giving them leadership roles, that helps support their propensity, let's say, for leadership. We can provide roles where some students are scribes so that maybe they don't feel as comfortable with speaking to each other, but if they're the ones writing everything down, then they tend not to need to speak as much. But finding ways to promote collaboration in a way that allows everyone to have a role and hopefully reduce that eye rolling that we see when we tell our students they're about to participate in a group project. Maybe if we call it a team project instead, that they might start seeing the difference in why they have a role in how that. I agree, Marianne. Definitely changing up the roles is an important thing for our students, especially our leaders. Sometimes we need to have them take on a role that requires them to follow directions. And for our English language learners, as they increase their comfort with English, we need to start assigning them more challenging roles where they are expected to use more English. I firmly believe that we need to constantly challenge our students. And perhaps we don't have the same roles for every team project that we give in our classes. If we change up the type of performance-based assessments that we use, then students would have different roles anyways. And if we continuously kind of weigh what their needs are, their skills that they have coming in, with that need to challenge them, then I think they'll have a more robust time within those performance-based assessments. Are there any others of these concepts that you find more challenging for your students?